Have you ever wondered what would really happen if you fell into quicksand?
I mean, we've all seen those old movies where people dramatically sink into it,
Getting swallowed whole by the earth.
while someone yells, "Grab the vine," or something equally intense.
But is that actually how it works? Or is it just Hollywood having a field day with our fears?
Imagine for a second that you're just strolling through the wilderness, minding your own business, and suddenly, bam!
You step right into it. What happens next? How deep will you go, and can you really get out?
This is What If Explanations, and today we're diving, not too deep, into the reality of what happens if you fall into quicksand.
Alright, so here's the first thing you need to know.
Quicksand isn't some bottomless pit ready to swallow you whole.
Despite what every dramatic scene might suggest.
In reality, quicksand is just a mixture of sand, clay, and water, a dense combination that acts more like a fluid than a solid.
So when you first step into it, you might feel a lot of resistance, kind of like stepping into a thick, gooey soup.
But why does it feel like you're being pulled down? And is there really anything pulling you at all?
Here's the science. When you put pressure on quicksand, like the weight of your body, the mixture gets disturbed, and the particles that were somewhat stable begin to shift.
What makes quicksand so tricky is that it's kind of like a liquid trapped between behaving like a solid.
The more you struggle, the more you mess with that balance, and the easier it becomes to sink.
So, imagine that moment where you're stuck and you start panicking. Your natural instinct would be to struggle, right?
Well, that's exactly the wrong thing to do.
Let's bust the myth right now. You won't get sucked under completely until you disappear.
The truth is humans are too buoyant.
We're mostly water after all, and our density is actually less than that of quicksand.
So, even if you fell into quicksand, the worst-case scenario isn't about disappearing under. It's more about being stuck up to your waist, or maybe even chest level, depending on how deep the quicksand is.
And while that sounds scary, it's not fatal by itself. What makes it dangerous is, well, everything else.
The environment around you, the exhaustion, the exposure, and whatever other critters might decide to pay you a visit while you're stuck.
Now, here's a little comfort. If you ever fall into quicksand, staying calm is your golden ticket.
Yeah, I know, easier said than done when you're sinking in a mix of mud and sand, but bear with me.
Panicking and flailing around only makes you sink deeper because you're pushing the particles apart and letting the water flow around you, basically making more space for yourself to get stuck in.
Instead, the best thing you can do is distribute your weight as much as possible.
Spread out your arms, try to lie back a bit, and let yourself float.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but lying back is actually the key to escaping.
Think of it like this. Have you ever tried to float in a swimming pool?
It's all about lying back, breathing deeply, and letting the water do the work.
The same principle applies with quicksand.
If you increase the surface area in contact with the quicksand, it'll have more to support, and you'll effectively stop sinking.
The more you spread out, the more buoyant you become.
And as for getting out,
Well, it's all about slow, deliberate movements. Wiggle one foot free, then the other.
take your time, there's no rush.
Remember, trying to sprint your way out of quicksand is like trying to swim against a riptide. It's just not going to happen. Now you might be thinking, if it's that simple, why does it look so terrifying in movies? That's a fair question. The answer is, it's Hollywood. Exaggeration sells, and nothing says drama like a character helplessly being swallowed by quicksand.
The thing is, nature can be pretty scary all on its own. Quicksand doesn't need a Hollywood twist to be intimidating.
Imagine getting stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no one around to help, and slowly realizing that any sudden movement just makes things worse.
It's about the psychological pressure, the fear of the unknown, and that feeling of being powerless.
Alright, here's a pro tip if you're ever in this unfortunate situation. Use anything you have to increase your surface area.
Got a stick? Lay it across the quicksand in front of you. Your backpack? Use it to help you spread your weight.
Basically, think of yourself as trying to become a human raft.
The more area you cover, the easier it will be to float and eventually work your way to solid ground.
And when I say work your way to solid ground, I mean move slowly, very, very slowly.
The more patient you are, the higher your chances of getting out without a problem.
But let's take a step back for a second. Where are you most likely to encounter quicksand anyway?
It's not like you're just going to stumble across it in your neighborhood park.
Quicksand is often found near riverbanks, marshes, or places where water can saturate sandy or silty soil.
So, if you're trekking through a swampy area or walking along a beach where fresh water meets the shore, you might just be in prime quicksand territory.
It forms when underground water saturates the sand, reducing the friction between particles, making the whole thing unstable.
Basically, all it takes is the right balance of water and sand to create this potentially sticky situation.
Here's another interesting bit. Quicksand can actually support quite a lot of weight until it's disturbed.
Animals can walk over it just fine, and even you could, if you were very, very gentle.
It's only when pressure is applied quickly that it starts acting like a liquid, which is why stepping in suddenly can lead to you getting stuck.
But if you approach it gingerly, almost like tiptoeing, you might just avoid falling in altogether.
Not that I'm suggesting you test this theory. Probably best to steer clear.
Now, let's address another myth. Can quicksand really eat things like cars or animals? Well, yes and no.
If something heavy enough sits on top of quicksand, it will start to sink, but not because the quicksand is actively pulling it under. It's a matter of weight and displacement.
The heavier the object, the more it displaces the sand-water mixture, which means it'll keep sinking until it reaches an equilibrium.
But cars, or large animals, aren't going to vanish like magic. They'll sink until they find a point where their density matches that of the quicksand.
So a car might be halfway stuck, but it's not going to disappear entirely unless there's a deeper cavity below.
You're probably still wondering, if the quicksand itself isn't deadly, then why is it so feared?
Well, that's all about context. The danger comes from your surroundings.
Imagine being stuck in quicksand with the tide coming in. Now that's a real problem.
Or maybe you're out hiking, you get stuck, and nightfall is approaching. Temperatures drop, and suddenly you're not just worried about being stuck. You're worried about hypothermia or dehydration.
The quicksand itself might not kill you, but being stuck in the wrong place at the wrong time absolutely could.
It's a reminder that while quicksand isn't the monster we see in movies, nature itself can be unforgiving.
So, what should you do if you find yourself in this sticky situation?
First and foremost, take a deep breath. Panic is your worst enemy here. Remember, quicksand is all about balance.
Your goal is to stay calm, float, and slowly work your way out. Call for help if anyone's around.
And if you're by yourself, focus on making small, deliberate movements. Try to lean back, get your legs as horizontal as possible, and inch your way out slowly.
It might take time, but slow and steady truly wins the race here.
Here's something else that might surprise you. Quicksand isn't just a warm weather phenomenon.
It can form in colder climates too, as long as there's enough water saturation.
So just because you're hiking through a chilly marsh doesn't mean you're safe from stepping into it. The key ingredient is water, not temperature.
And that means that even in places you might not expect it, if the ground has that right mix of silt, clay, and water, yep, you guessed it, you could still find yourself falling into quicksand.
And let's not forget, quicksand also varies in consistency.
Some quicksand is thicker, with more clay in the mix, which means it's denser and harder to get stuck in deeply.
Other types are looser, more water-based, and far easier to sink into.
Depending on where you are, you could encounter different types of quicksand with varying levels of suction.
But no matter the type, the rules remain the same. Stay calm, spread your weight, and work your way out deliberately.
In conclusion, while falling into quicksand isn't as horrifying as Hollywood wants you to believe, it's still no picnic.
The key takeaway here is that the more you know, the better prepared you are.
If you're ever exploring the great outdoors and find yourself in an area that looks suspiciously like a potential quicksand zone, remember, knowledge is power.
And in this case, it's also your way out. No need to fear disappearing completely. Just stay cool, stay still, and get yourself out, one careful move at a time.
Another important thing to consider when dealing with quicksand is the power of teamwork.
If you're not alone and someone else is with you, they can play a crucial role in helping you get out.
The key is for them to avoid panicking as well. Having someone on solid ground who can pull you out with a rope, stick, or even their bare hands, if they're careful, greatly increases your chances of escape.
Working together to navigate the situation is often much more effective than struggling alone, as a grounded helper can provide stability and the leverage needed to pull you out of the sticky trap.
And finally, prevention is the best defense. If you're exploring areas known for quicksand, always carry a walking stick or pole.
These can help you test the ground in front of you, providing an early warning before you step into trouble.
It's also a good idea to wear shoes that can be easily removed if needed. Sometimes, the best way to free yourself is to let go of what's weighing you down.
And remember, quicksand thrives in wet, marshy areas, so avoid wandering off trails or venturing into areas where water and sand mix freely.
By taking a few simple precautions, you can steer clear of an unexpected and potentially exhausting encounter with quicksand.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, pun absolutely intended, into the reality of quicksand, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more fascinating what-if scenarios.
We've got plenty more adventures, myths to bust, and surprising truths about our world to share.
This has been What If Explanations. See you next time and stay safe out there. And remember, if you fall into quicksand, just breathe and float.